So the inflation numbers on the face of it look like things are going well. CPI has cooled down. Food inflation has cooled down quite a bit as far as the September data is concerned. But the first few days of October, nearly the first 20 days now, have seen a very sharp spike in the prices of vegetables. This is being seen in city over city, and the number of factors behind it are many. For one, of course, high fuel prices is contributing to high vegetable prices. Unseasonal rains has also short-circuited the supply to some extent, but it's not just vegetable prices. Think about it from the common man's point of view and a daily existence. The price of LPG cylinders recently was hiked by 15 rupees per cylinder. Edible oil prices are on the boil. The government is now trying to do a lot of manipulations to try and bring down those prices. That relief, if it comes, is yet to kick in. The kitchen budget has gone completely out of whack. On the other hand, a family that wants to buy anything, a new refrigerator, a TV, an air conditioner, a laptop, a mobile phone, has to in most cases pay at least 10 to 20% more than last year. Any kind of expenditure really has gone up because of high input prices, and that input cost pressure is now beginning to show as demand picks up. So when it comes to fuel prices, which is the elephant in the room, is the finance ministry going to do something about it? Well, here's Ruchi Bhatia's report on what the thinking is right now within FinMin.
Fuel prices are reaching almost 105 rupees per litre in Delhi, but looks like there's no relief in the offing for the common man. Finance Ministry believes that any consideration on excise duty will only be a political call, and at this moment the government needs to push growth and capex, and which is why the revenue considerations are far higher. For example, a 1 rupee cut on in terms of excise duty on fuel is going to have a revenue impact of close to 14,000 crore rupees annually, and also the weightage of fuel in the CPI basket is just about 6 to 7%, and which is why the focus in the coming days will be on food inflation, where the government has already taken a massive hit of close to 18,000 crore rupees by undertaking various duty cuts as well in terms of edible oil. They have taken several steps in terms of imposing stock holding limits on edible oil as well, and this is where bulk of the impact on inflation really comes in from, which is why the focus is going to be on food inflation and not on fuel, which means any decision on fuel prices will only be a political one, even though the RBI Governor Shaktikanta Das has been making a case regularly with the government to reduce excise duty on fuel. Looks like at the moment the government is squarely focused on food prices to bring in relief for the common man in the festive season, but nothing so far as fuel prices are concerned.
So what is the situation in the bazaars, in the mandis? My colleagues Samir and Kritika checked out the ground reality both in Delhi and Mumbai. Take a look at their reports.
The retail inflation is really hitting the pockets of common man. To check the ground reality, we are here at Okhla, the wholesale vegetable market in New Delhi, and here you can see all the shops that are placed over here. The owners, the shopkeepers or the wholesaler, they are all crying for one simple reason, that for the last couple of days, as the prices of petrol and diesel, it has gone up, it has also resulted in the escalation of prices of these wholesale vegetable market as well. So to get actual status of what the price rise is and how it is really hitting the common man, to know the fact, for example, if we talk about the onion, so the prices of onion has shoot up by around like 10 to 20%. But what exactly is the price?
एक हफ्ते में कम से कम 20 रुपए किलो का नजर आया फर्क।
20 रुपए किलो? हाँ। पहले कितना माल आ रहा था और अभी कितना आ रहा है?
पहले माल बढ़िया आ रहा था, सही आ रहा था। अब डीजल पेट्रोल जब से रेट बढ़े हैं तो गाड़ियों का भाड़ा बढ़ चुका है, तो गाड़ी वाले लाने में वो कर रहे हैं, फिर प्याज भी कम है पीछे, इसलिए 20 रुपए किलो का ज़्यादा रेट हो गया है।
बढ़ोतरी है कि मानसूनी अभी बारिशात है, कुछ फसलें मर गई है। लोकल साइड में जो टमाटर थी वो ख़त्म हो चुकी, बाहर बेंगलोर और ये इंदौर वगैरह नासिक वगैरह में टमाटर का पोजीशन काफ़ी टाइट है, क्योंकि फसल नहीं है। वहाँ से किराया का पेट्रोल काफ़ी महंगी है, पेट्रोल तो हर जगह पूरी इंडिया में भारत में महंगी है, लेकिन किराया की अगर 1 रुपये पेट्रोल बढ़े तो 1 लाख महंगाई, अगर 5 रुपये बढ़ गए तो 5 लाख महंगाई ऊपर हो गई है। ठीक है, और अगर ये 3 रुपये महंगाई है तो पीछे 80,000 जो भाड़े थी इस टाइम 50,000 ऊपर मांग रहे हैं, यानी कि 1,30,000 रुपये हो गए एक ट्रक के। हाँ, पीछे 80,000, एक जब से पेट्रोल महंगा हो तो 50,000 महंगाई का किराया ऊपर।
Now, this can really be understood in a very easy term that the freight charges have gone up, and that is further escalating the prices of the concerned commodity in the retail market, and that is really hitting the common man as well.
So here we are in Dadar Sabzi Market, and we are here to get a sense that how the vegetable prices have been faring. We spoke to a few vendors and customers, and we got to know that prices right now of onions, tomatoes and other vegetables have been skyrocketing. And as we spoke to the vendors, they said that it is because of the erratic rains that happened in Maharashtra in September, and it is also because of higher fuel prices, which adds up to the cost of transportation. We spoke to the few vendors, and we got to know that tomatoes right now are faring at 40 to 60 rupees a kilo, while in September they were around 20 rupees a kilo. Even onions right now, they are costing rupees 40 to 50 rupees a kilo, while in September they were around 20 rupees a kg. And as we spoke to the vendors, we got to know that prices of potatoes have been relatively stable. This is because potatoes are kept in cold storage, and when there is shortfall in stock, they increase the supply to meet the demand. The higher prices are not only limited to onions and tomatoes, but even the prices of cauliflower or coriander. Coriander, which in September cost around 10 to 15 rupees a bundle, right now is costing around 80 rupees a bundle. So even if we see that cauliflower, which in September was around 20 rupees, 40 rupees a bundle, is now costing 80 rupees a bundle. So we see that higher food prices, higher vegetable prices are going to pinch the pocket of customers this festival season, and it remains to be seen that how the prices will fare as we move towards Diwali, towards our greater festival period. Please tell us that at what prices are you buying onion right now, and what was the price 20 days back?
I haven't bought onion as such, but I can feel that this tomato is getting costlier very much, because earlier we used to buy around 40 rupees per kg, but now it is 60 rupees per kg. So you can see around 50% hike is there in tomato prices. And
All right, that was the ground report. What is happening on the economic front, and what will be the impact of this inflation? Is it going to be transitory, as many are hoping? Is it just a function, when we talk about food inflation, is it only a function of delayed monsoons, erratic rains, and of course fuel prices feeding in? Rahul Bajoria, Chief India Economist, Barclays, on the show with me this evening. Upasna Bhardwaj, Senior Economist, Kotak Mahindra Bank, speaking with me, and Mythili, Bhusnurmath, Consulting Editor, ET Now, also on the show. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for joining us. Rahul, explain to us this disconnect we are seeing. CPI is looking on the face of it like the problems have eased, but talk to anyone and you know that they're beginning to feel the pinch. Is part of it because of a base effect, that it seems like inflation, at least statistically, may have come down?
Hi, Tamanna. Yeah, absolutely. I think the base effects and the fact that, sequential inflation may not translate into what is the picture, that's being seen on a year basis is where the disconnect lies here. This time around, typically in the summer months, we do see seasonal prices for particular perishable food items like vegetables increase. But, the increase was quite benign in the first few months, which basically triggered the downside surprises. And now, because of a combination of factors on the supply side and higher costs, we are seeing, what I would basically call as mean reversion of perishable inflation. So that pick up in prices along with some, specific supply side factors is contributing to this increase. It will still not have a material impact on a headline inflation basis, at least for the next 1 or 2 months. But then as, this price shock maybe starts to persist, then the RBI start worried about its impact on inflation expectations, particularly given the frequency at which these products are purchased and the price recall, that has an impact on the inflation expectations channel itself.
Yeah. One part of the story is about statistics, it's about the headline inflation numbers, it's about what the RBI and then the finance ministry will do. But the other very important part of the story is what ordinary Indians are facing. And Upasna, I'd like to hear your views on that. What are we seeing right now? We know that in October, at least the first 2-3 weeks or so, there has been quite a spike in prices, but it's not just vegetable prices, as I mentioned earlier. It is a host of commodities. I mean, really anything anyone wants to do, they will possibly have to pay a lot more than they did even 6 months ago, whether it is purchasing a new, consumer durable, or whether it is traveling anywhere.
Absolutely. I think we need to split the headline into core inflation and food inflation firstly. So even if we split that, we look at the food inflation, which has, even for the month of September, let's say, the headline is benign largely because of food inflation. And that's because of the favorable base effect, apart from some sequential declines that we've seen. Apart from that, the core inflation has remained rather elevated at 6%. And it's quite sticky around that. And the impact that you're talking about in October is, of course, in part because of erratic rains, etc., as you mentioned earlier. The other is lagged impact of, the carrying cost, the logistic cost, which is now beginning to bear on the cost of food as well. And of course, alongside the core inflation too, because, demand is picking up. There is a problem of supply side constraints. Global supply chains are broken. And all of that is now playing out slowly, which is anyways expected to play out. So I think most of us have been very cautious in terms of future trajectory of inflation. We have been voicing our concerns on that account. It is the food inflation which tends to surprise on either direction, and I would say because it tends to be volatile. So food prices are also showing an upside already. Nonetheless, the next two readings, I would agree with Rahul. We are looking at very benign readings, largely again helped by a favorable base effect. From December reading onwards, for which we'll get to know only in January, basically, the data which will be released in January. Onwards, the base effect wears off, and that's when the reality sets in, when we start seeing inflation again hovering towards 5.5% plus. So I think we are moving there again. In the next calendar year, first half of the year, we will again be anchoring somewhere closer to 5.5 to 6%.
One thing is that the base effect peters out in December, as you mentioned, and we will see benign numbers for the next couple of months. But Mythili, I want to come back to how the government is dealing with this. Now, we know that there has been some action on edible oil. We don't know what it will translate to. But for the ordinary Indian right now, she is grappling with a price rise on all fronts. Is that not a matter of concern?
Oh yes, it is a matter of huge concern, and it should have been a matter of concern to the Reserve Bank of India also, which has a primary responsibility of keeping inflation under control. Remember, we moved to an inflation targeting regime precisely to get inflation under control. It was a band of 2 to 6%. Whereas what we have seen is RBI, in fact, I would say, has abdicated its responsibility on the price control front by focusing so totally on growth that it has been completely oblivious to the ticking time bomb as far as inflation is concerned. It has been grossly behind the curve. And the fact is that the temporary benign numbers that we are seeing are entirely, as because Rahul and said, that it is because of the base effect. We had very high inflation in the month of September, October, November last year, and that is why inflation seems to be benign. But the Reserve Bank of India should have been able to see through this, because what we have seen is the entire last fiscal inflation average was 6.2%. Higher than the RBI's own upper limit of the target range. Yes, it was important to put growth first, but it should have got off the tiger. It did not do that in time, as a result of which we are now seeing inflation catch up, not only because of unseasonal rains and short-term factors like this, but also because we're seeing globally, oil prices are up, edible prices are up, food prices are up, oil prices are up 96% year on year. And we've seen country after country tightening monetary policy, raising rates of interest. The Czech Republic recently raised its interest by 75 basis points, the first time in the highest in 24 years, whereas the Reserve Bank of India still prefers to see this as transient. Unfortunately, inflation expectations have shot up, and I think now Reserve Bank has really missed the bus. So even though the government is trying to do its bit, I think the fact is that in terms of stimulus, the government did not do enough. So then the Reserve Bank stepped in and did a yeoman job in really lifting up the economy. But the problem was that it did not get off that soon enough. And today we are paying the price for that. Not everybody, we've seen a K-shaped recovery. So the rich are doing well, stock markets are doing well, whereas the lower income classes and the poor are suffering.
Well, at some point it will catch up, won't it? Rahul Bajoria, explain to us why this really can't go on as ever. I mean, when we speak to manufacturers from various sectors, what they tell us that their input costs have increased and they haven't passed it all on yet. Whatever sector you pick, whether it's automakers or it's makers of homes, developers, makers of cosmetics, everyone's costs have gone up massively and they haven't passed it on because they're just about seeing demand picking up and they don't want to spoil that party. But at some point they will have to pass it on, won't they? Will this be transitory or is this just going to get worse?
No, I think the costs have to be passed on, and we are already seeing in sectors where, say, there is an element of, pricing power visible, say autos, for instance, automobile prices have been rising for quite some time. We have seen cement prices increase in recent times in sectors where, say, labor has become much more expensive, say healthcare, for instance, we have seen costs go up, right? So I think it's a sector by sector story. There's a lot of heterogeneity in the timings around which, these rising input being passed on. But yeah, over a period of time, they will get completely reflected. I think the challenge, though, is really kind of understand, what is being driven by demand versus what is being driven by supply. I think fundamentally the view, what I would describe as a revealed higher tolerance, right, for inflation, I think comes from the fact that a lot of these supply bottlenecks are not really domestic in nature. They're largely global in nature. So, from that standpoint, India being a large importer and basically a price taker in international markets for most of these commodities, our demand is not really going to make a fundamental difference in terms of the prices that we are getting, right? And I think that's the view that's being taken within the policy circles at the moment. This is something that India just has to weather out, and the price increases are something that will sort of feed through, but there's actually very limited option unless we are willing to deploy the fiscal balance sheet in order to mitigate the price impact.
Yeah. Upasna, what do you think are the steps that need to be taken at this point from the government's point of view? We played a report at the beginning of this conversation about how there seems to be very little legroom on fuel prices. The governor keeps reminding the government that you need to cut fuel prices, but that's become now a political situation. And the theory is that it's not really going to impact the CPI. The number will look fine, so why lose all of that revenue? Can we afford to continue down this path?
Well, I think, excise duty on fuel products can, of course, be resorted to. I think that can be considered. While direct impact is going to be minimal of that on inflation. But again, there are two aspects to this. One is the indirect impact, which has a much more long-lasting impact. I think over the course of next few quarters, that that tends to spill over on the carrying cost of food and every other item that we talked about. So that indirect impact gets managed very well, even though the direct impact is low. The second important aspect is, of course, that the inflation expectations will somewhere get anchored well. I think that is very important because something like a food price or the petrol pump prices that we pay, they are directly related to increasing inflation expectations for a consumer. And these are two reasons why I think excise duty cut, especially given that there is room for the government. The center does have buffer. Their tax collections have been very robust compared to what they had budgeted. So, of course, they have the option of either to fiscally consolidate or deliver on that level. And they do have that option because also they haven't been spending as much. If we look at the kind of cash balances that the center is sitting with right now, we do believe that there's adequate room that they have to either they will not be able to spend that much because of the limited number of months that are left. And in all of this, they do have buffer to reduce excise duty. And of course, it will be on a pro rata basis. So for this financial year, we will not see the full impact of that also. We'll see that spill over into the next year. So we'll have to keep all of that in mind. And I think that is one big step which the government can take at this point.
Yeah. Mythili, will the government, in your view, bite the bullet and cut excise duties, because it's become a, pehle aap situation? Will center do it? Will states do it? And on the other hand, is there a fear that this kind of inflationary pressure will at some point start impacting the demand revival that we've seen?
Oh, well, yes, the government, I would agree with Upasna, the government does have scope to cut excise duty, but as you know, state governments also levy VAT. So and that is related to the value of the product. So in fact, the excise tax cut will not make as much a difference as if the states were to roll back their VATs, which is very unlikely because states are completely crushed in terms of revenue concerns. So even if the central government were to cut excise, it will not make a major difference. But yes, there is scope for them to cut. But at the same time, unfortunately, even if they were to cut, this has come at a time when oil prices are really shooting through the roof. Today, we saw it cross $85 a barrel. Now, at that kind of level, even if the government were to cut excise, it would make a difference only at the margin. So the scope for government to cut excise duty and thereby make inflation expectations more benign is limited. Unfortunately, inflation expectations are getting very entrenched. And this is when the second order effects kick in. So I'm afraid we're going to have a very, very tough time as far as the poor and the middle class in this country are concerned. We'll have to live with higher inflation because remember, monetary policy acts with a lag of at least up to a year. So even if the RBI were to tighten monetary policy, which is a big if, because it has made it very clear that it sees this still as transitory, even though country after country central banks have raised interest rates. So even if the RBI were to act a little late, but better late than never, it will not have an impact immediately. Government cutting excise tax will also not have an immediate impact at all. So I'm afraid we are in for tough times. Growth will get impacted ultimately because when people are wary of inflation, it does hit demand. You first need to survive and then you will demand even basic products. And today the problem is that prices of food, vegetables, even those are going sky high at a time when people have lost jobs, lost income. So I'm afraid it's it's a very, very tough option really before both RBI, government, focus it all for individuals.
Absolutely. Don't be confused by the headlines of, luxury cars selling out. That's not the full picture of what we're seeing in India. It's great, stock markets are booming. It's great, as Mythili said, that the rich are getting richer. Well, let them. But the poor getting poorer and then being faced with inflation is not going to end up well for anyone, including the rich, eventually. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us on this very important debate right here on the India Development.